Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We're so glad you're joining us for today's session. We'll give you just a minute and make sure we can get everyone in. Today's going to be a valuable session, especially if you're thinking about selling your dental practice anytime in the near future or just even down the road. Our topic today is building a practice that's not just profitable, but sellable. So whether you are thinking about transitioning, whether it's 5 years away or 15 years away, the choices you make today have a direct impact on your future valuation. So I just want you to know there is a Q&A at the bottom of the screen. If you want to pull that up, if you have any questions as Greg goes along, I do want to introduce you to Greg. He will try to get to those questions before the end of the webinar. We are thrilled to welcome our presenter, Greg Auerbach. He is the Senior Director of Henry Schein Dental Practice Transition. So this is his day-to-day, every day. Greg quite literally grew up in the dental world. His father was a successful dentist, and he spent nearly 2 decades helping other dentists navigate practice, growth, and successful transitions. Greg brings a unique perspective not only from his background in engineering and business, but also as someone who's been on all sides of the table. He's been an associate, a buyer, a partner, and a seller. And he's consulted with thousands of practices nationwide. He's passionate about helping doctors build value that lasts long after they hang up the handpiece. So in today's session, Greg's going to walk us through those financial indicators that matter most to potential buyers and DSOs. So if you want to retire sooner with fewer regrets, this is an insider session you don't want to miss. So Greg, welcome. Greg Auerbach from Henry Schein.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys. I appreciate that. That was a great intro. Which gets me my whole slide. My next slide is just my intro,
Oh,
which we've
nice.
kind of already done. But thank you so much. I appreciate being here. I appreciate you all being here as well. And certainly if there are questions, we'll try to get to them at the end or follow up with them. I like questions. I mentioned if I could have an hour's worth of questions and just do questions, it's great because that's what you guys want to hear. So just as far as my background, I have an MBA as well as an engineering degree. I've been doing this for over 20 years in evaluating and transacting practices, primarily in Florida, but I have worked throughout the country. I've even consulted with a couple of practices in Europe as well. And I also help, as part of our transitions team here in the US, I help our Canadian counterparts because we have a team in Canada that is practice transitions, and that's part of my day-to-day job responsibility as well. As was noted, I did associate in my practice transitions business. I bought in, I owned the practice and the business for a while, and then we sold it to Henry Schein, and that was over 10 years ago now. I've been a top producer, but I've transitioned out of that into this role where I now support our sales team, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, with our valuations and our operations team and everything that goes on to help you all get from essentially listing to closing. We all work on the background to help that process go along. I live in Orlando. I married my wife Veronica, and I have 3 girls: Scarlett, Alice, and Colette. We just adopted a puppy. She didn't make it on the slide. She's been here for about a month. So if you hear her in the background, she's around the house as well. I spend a lot of my time with 3 girls though, at dance, now more so at gymnastics, piano, and being here in Orlando and not far from Disney. We spend a lot of time at Disney and on Disney cruises. I like to say out of the front of my house, out of Alice's room, that she can watch fireworks from Magic Kingdom every night. Out of the back of our house, or where Colette's room is, we can actually watch the myriad of SpaceX launches that go out. So we're right here in Central Florida. As was noted, my upbringing was in dentistry. My dad practiced for almost 20 years. This is his building. This is downtown Seattle. So you can see the kind of the Google Map icon there on the medical dental building in downtown Seattle. This is my wife and I. Before we got married, I took her by and we took pictures. So you can see that building on the left. That is the medical dental building overall. These are my kids. We took them a couple years ago, and you can see it's on a big street. There's a parking garage over to the side. You can see the building doesn't have a name on the door except for medical dental building. In fact, when my father worked in in this building, you had to go in, and on the left-hand side were those black and, black pegboards with the white letters, and it would say Dr. Stuart Auerbach and have his suite number. You'd have to go in to these elevators, which are right behind my oldest. This is Scarlett in the middle. But you can see maybe in the back, there's some elevators there. You had a choice. There were left and right elevators. You would go up either of those elevators, get off on the fourth floor, come out. There was only one way to come out, but at the end of those elevators, you could either go left or you could go right. And you had to know to go right, and you had to know to go to the very end of the hallway where my father's practice was. I bring this up because we hear a lot from purchasers that you need to be on a large road, and you need to have big signage, and you need to have big advertising. That was not the case for my father. And he has not practiced now for just about 30 years. And when he retired out of practice, he was doing just under $1 million worth of collections over 30 years ago. And again, this was not in a case where he had big signage. He was in the medical dental building full of medical dental professionals. To get to his office as a general practitioner, you had to go by multiple other general practices. So to me, your practices are built based on you, based on how you treat your patients, based your patient mix, your staff, everything that goes into your practice is what brings your patients in the door. It's not necessarily the value in a sign, a name, except for your own and how you treat your patients and the quality of the dentistry that you do. That's a little background on me. Oh, this is the building in downtown Seattle again. I like to leave my kids up a little bit longer, but this is the building again, big square. The right-hand side is Westlake Center. You can see the monorail, that famous monorail from the World's Fair. That's again where he practiced. It was right in the middle of the heart of downtown Seattle. In fact, that building that's kind of shorter on the left behind the Bank of America sign, that was a parking lot when he practiced. So again, this was not big sign, big advertising on the front door. And he was hugely successful in practice. That was a little bit about me. This is a little bit about our team at Dental Practice Transitions. We have TSCs or transitions consultants throughout the country, and we cover basically the entirety of the country with the exception of Rhode Island. We have sales support staff throughout the country and leadership throughout the country as well, really covering everywhere you could be. And as I mentioned, we are not just in the United States. I cover our team also in Canada, and we have a separate team that's in the UK as well. What do? We do obviously practice valuations, which is what we're going to talk a lot about today. Practice sales, and that would be both the private and groups. We have practice transition planning and overall emergency exit planning, which we'll talk about shortly. And then, of course, we have a lot of additional resources. And one of the benefits of being with Henry Schein, we have our IDSO, which is our large practice partnerships group, which is LPS. We have associate placement through Henry Schein Dental Recruitment Services. Practice acquisition and startup financing through financial services, equipment financing, again, through financial services. We do insurance credentialing and collections, and obviously between Unitas, PPO, and from you all with eAssist, we have that as an avenue that we bring into our transactions as well. And then we have practice development and operations through practice services. So we really are a full suite of services to provide for you in both growing and transacting your practices. For us at DPT, just since 2021, we've done almost 2,000 practice valuations, which is about 1.9 billion in practice value. So we're very busy as far as doing practice valuations. Just last year, we did 423 practice valuations, and that estimated out to about $430 million worth of practice value. Just for reference, that's about just over 8% more value than was in 2023. So practice value has certainly been increasing, and that's been going on pretty steadily since COVID. Practice sale-wise, we did 234 practice closings last year, and that was pretty stable from 2023 as well. And that represented over $190 million in sales price. So again, we are very busy throughout the country. We're probably the busiest practice transitions firm throughout the country. I'm the only one that is really a single house working in the entirety of the country. We're not franchised or anything like that. Our team works for us, and everything is centralized with us. Just this year, just so you know, as an update, we've done almost 200 practice valuations and $191 million in practice value. So we're, again, continuing to be very busy. This continues to build what is the largest database of practice transitions in the country. So our team is fortunate as our internal team with our analysts to be able to go in and pull comparables and pull a significant amount of data just from our own transactional work. again, throughout the country, something that's really unmatched. We do have our partners at Large Practice Sales. They take care of our large sales as they are large practice sales. They are the largest invisible DSO transaction advisor in the United States. They work just like we do with sellers and owners. This is a unique, they have actually very unique expertise, and it's something that's actually a very complementary service to what we provide at dental practice transitions, because the process, if you're looking to convert and work as a partner with one of these larger DSO organizations, and become a partner in those, is a very significantly different process than it is with dental practice transitions, where we're transacting and you're mostly retiring. So in the last 24 months, LPS has done over $1 billion worth of partnerships, and they joined our team just about 2 years ago now, and we're very happy to have them because, again, very complimentary service. And for those of you who are perhaps a little bit younger, looking to stay in practice, but you have a larger practice overall, this is the team that helps you really monetize and draw out a significant amount of value in your practice as it is right now. So speaking about value, let's get into the actual topic at hand. We have a piece that we go into a little bit more depth on, but I'm going to do it kind of briefly just to get us started, which is basically 5 ways to ensure your practice won't sell. And these are real things because these are things that we deal with as transitions firm and transitions consultants on almost a daily basis. So the 5th thing that we talk about is you. One of the things that we look at in a practice and when we're evaluating a practice is the ability to reproduce who you are and what your practice is and transfer that to somebody else. Can they operate the practice and continue to operate it the way that you're operating it, or is it something that's very unique to you? So this could be a very highly specialized practice. Maybe you're a super GP, or maybe you found a way to run your practice incredibly efficiently that only you know how to do that. Those cases make a transaction much more difficult. In reality, we want something that's as mainstream as possible because it broadens the market to more practitioners that can buy. And when we do that, the value obviously goes up. This is a normal market overall. So the larger the market that's out there, again, the higher value that we can find. So the more that we can reproduce and transfer over as smoothly as possible to the vast majority of practitioners, the higher interest and therefore the higher value you're able to get. Number 4 would be equipment and age. And that could be the age of your equipment, but also the age of your facility. This comes into importance in keeping up with investing in technology. If you are not digitized at this point, that's a problem in practice transition. I've been in this long enough where we were using only film radiography, and I've been through the entirety of the transition to digital. Purchasers at this point don't know how to read film radiography. And if it's of your mindset that you're currently using film and your mindset is that a purchaser can pick the system that they want to, and that's going to be better off for them, I will tell you that the cost of you investing in that technology now is significantly less than a purchaser will estimate it to be when they make an offer on your practice and reduce that amount from your practice. So if it's something that would cost you, say, $25,000 now, I will assure you that a purchaser will say that that same cost is going to be somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000. So there's incredible value for you to invest in new technology though, that you're going to use. If it's just going to be something that's going to be a doorstop in your office, if you are not into CAD/CAM, don't buy CAD/CAM just to have it. But if it's something that you can implement into your office and have your practice and staff running with it, that's valuable and value adding to the practice overall. That would same thing go for the facility. If a purchaser walks in and says, well, this facility is very old, I have to do a lot of work to it, then it will certainly reflect in a offer to you in the price. Speaking of facility, landlord, lease, and property issues. We just this week had to come up and find out that a owner who we've had listed for sale is going to have to now just close their practice and not transact it because the landlord will not provide a lease. And it's not a lease to the buyer that we found, it's a lease at all. So in this case, when we can't transfer the property to someone, and particularly that person that's going to be buying your dental practice, there is no value. Banks will not loan on it. Advisors will not allow it to happen. So again, you end up being in a liquidation phase which is significantly less valuable than buying a practice operating in space. So if you are leasing your space, please take the time to go review your leases, ideally with experts that know leases and attorneys, and hopefully we can get that negotiated out so we can make sure that you have a lease that is available. I don't need it to necessarily be transferable, but I need the space to be available. Similar contract issue would be associates. If you have an associate in your practice or multiple associates, please make sure they have a restrictive covenant. In almost all of the country, that is something that can happen, and it can be transferable also. It must be enforceable and transferable. This is the protection for your practice in the case of the buyer is going to take it over, the associate doesn't stay, and it keeps them from going across the street and taking those patients that they've worked on with them. So this can be hugely damaging to value in potentially even closing out an entire possibility to sell a practice. So if you do have associates in your practice, please make sure those contracts have a restrictive covenant. And we can certainly get you with attorneys that can help you get there if you don't have that. That's incredibly vital for you. So the last thing, which is what we're going to talk about most, and this has always been the number one thing on the list, would be declining or varying revenue. And this absolutely can be a deal killer for so many, many reasons. Like I said, we'll talk a little bit more now about where that goes. So this is one of those questions about that topic. I mean, which one of these would you prefer? These three lines could represent just about anything. It could be a stock sale. Overall, you buying a certain stock on the stock market, or a dental practice. You can see on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, they start and end at the same point. But if we have this modality, or this one, or something like this, which is more appealing? And I would think that you're going to say the top. The top is a more conservative one. We're getting from point A to point B, but we have less of a hiccup to get there. The second one has a little bit more, and we saw this a lot of COVID, and even the dip that we show in the first one, that could be explained through COVID, but the practice bounces back and we're ending up at the same point. The big piece on the third one, though, is just the question of what's going on here? How are we getting there? And do the valleys match out the peaks? And typically they don't. So the losses that you have in those valleys don't make up for the growth that you've had in those peaks. And although you end up at the same place at the end point, you've had losses along the way so that your net benefit at the end was significantly less. The huge variability about what's going on brings a lot of questions, a lot of consternation, and any of those uncertainty points, just like in anything that goes on, again, outside of dentistry, just in the regular world, say economics or stock market or whatever it may be, uncertainty is a concern and it brings down value. So if we can get your practice, ideally, more looking like the top one, less looking like the bottom one, although you end up at the same point on every one of these, your value is really in the top because, again, it's just more transferable overall. So the implications of declining or inconsistent revenue, again, it impairs value and cash flow, as I just talked about. This very well, though, could limit buyer financing. Okay, we are not just talking about a buyer making a decision, though. And in these cases, we have a bank that's involved and making a decision as well. So it's somebody else putting eyes and asking questions on what is going on. And so it may limit the ability to get financing because of that variability overall. Because of that, there may be a different deal structure. You may have to hold financing. You may have an earnout or a holdback, which you may or may not make. That's going to be a payout that happens over time when certain benchmarks are met. But that's all bred because of the uncertainty of where that third practice and the ups and downs came from, because it's very hard to look forward from the past to say that there's a consistency. So what are the things that you can do? Some of these have nothing to do with collections themselves, at least not your collections based on your billings, but one of them is just don't reduce your availability as you get towards a potential transition. Steer clear of those missteps that potentially reduce patient flow. One of those is just by saying, we don't take any patients, we're not taking new patients right now. I mean, that is a practice killer on its own, but you can steer clear of those missteps and that will help. But then obviously the biggest one is what you're billing out is making sure that you are collecting that. And that's even going with what you're producing, because sometimes what you're billing out is not equal to what you're producing, but you need to make sure you're collecting as most of that. We absolutely have seen significant reductions in offer prices based on fluctuations in how the practice has operated over the past. And again, this is because a purchaser and their advisors are looking for that consistency to project forward. We are not projecting forward as far as value goes. That is not the way business valuation works. But a buyer is always buying that future opportunity, and the cleaner it looks to them and the more stable it looks to them going forward, the easier it is for them to understand where that's going and their ability to buy in, if you will, and then pay for the practice. So what is value though, and how is value determined? So we have the methodologies, which we put in quotes, that are out there. That would be anything of percentage of gross income, a multiple of net income, or a percentage of net income sometimes. It could be some combination plus the tangible assets, or there's the swag method, which is our MBA term for silly, wild ass guess. Those are just guesses. That is throwing a dart at a dartboard, and it's not true methodology in getting to practice value. We have a team that I take care of, and we work very hard to implement the non-quoted methodologies, which we'll go through in a minute. But let's talk about two practices. If we have practice A that's grossing 800,000 at 6 operatories, and it looks like this. So let's say the equipment are current. And we have practice B with the same gross collections, but it's 6 operatories of vintage equipment, and all of these are real practice pictures. The question is, are they both worth the same amount of money? And in basically every case, the answer is no. A purchaser is going to walk into practice B and say, I have to do significantly more work here to get it to where I want it to be, which is practice A. Therefore, I'm going to pay less for it. Yeah, the gross collections may be the same, but that's just not the way that the market ends up working. So you're spending time to invest and keep your practice up to date aesthetically is important. Not just aesthetics, though. If we have 2 practices grossing 800, 6 operatories again, but different overhead this time. So overhead of practice A is 65%, but practice B is 60%. Same question, are they both worth the same amount? And the practical answer again is no, because you get to make more money out of practice B. Wouldn't you be willing to pay for that? And that's the baseline of where we get valuation methodologies is, and why we ask for so much documentation and so many questions is because we're trying to figure this out. The third part of this, though, again, practice A and practice B, but practice A has high percentage of collections and it's broadly stable in dollars, or practice B is a low percentage of collections and highly variable in dollars. Again, are they worth the same? And I will tell you, just by practice alone, if not anything else, they are not. You will get, practice B will get significantly more questions than practice A and much more scrutiny than practice A, and that ultimately drives down value. There are purchasers out here that just would be scared of taking over practice B because they would look at it and say, well, we're producing more to get to the same amount of collections, and the dollars are variable, so we aren't collecting it even that great. So what's going on here? How am I going to fix it? How much work am I going to have to do to get it to where practice A is? Am I willing to invest myself in doing that? And what is the time and the cost to get there? So there could be great value in practice B, but it generally will not sell for as much as practice A. And that's where practice value ends up being. That's why this is that important. So these are actual methodologies. These are the ones that we are using in-house for your valuations. The asset summation approach is just actually taking all of your assets, which would be your tangible assets, your chairs, your computers, your all the rest of your equipment, everything in your practice, plus your goodwill, which is the intangible, and that's the most valuable piece of your practice, and basically adding that together. We have databases to go work off of, again, of comparables, and we're able to put those assets together and come up with a value. That's one of the approaches. The second is the guideline transaction or market approach. This is where we're, again, looking at comparables. Think of it as Zillow or Realtor, except that the databases of practice transitions throughout the country is a private database. There is no public database for this information. The databases that are out there that are public require submissions. So again, they are not publicly notated, just like real estate is. So in something that is one of those advantages that we have overall in the entirety of the country is that we do have the largest database to access, particularly of most current transactions overall. And that's what we go to when we're assigning value based on the transaction or market approach. The last, which is kind of what we were referring to just a few minutes ago, based on overhead, the income or the capitalization of earnings approach. We use them interchangeably. We're going to do adjustments to your financials to figure out what the practice is actually doing. We're going to establish a third-party owner earnings amount. So how much, say, a non-practitioner like myself were to buy your practice, operate it, and then how much do I take home? From there, we look at a risk factor of how challenging your practice would be to transfer and maintain, which included in that, again, is how are you collecting your production? But we calculate that risk factor. That's a required return on investment, and we put those pieces together to come up with value. This is the most detailed methodology that we're using, but we use all three in concert to work together to come to hopefully a consensus, ideally between the three, to then establish a final value. So again, this is far cry from throwing a dart at a dartboard and just putting a percentage of gross. Ultimately, in that methodology, that last one, and really all of them though, value is a function of net income, how much is at the end of the day, and how much risk, what is it going to take to get me there? So again, if we talk about risk, we're talking about variability in the practice, but that could be in collections, systems, how the daily operations go, patient flow goes, billing, whatever it may be. Risk can encompass a lot of different things, and we try to encapsulate that. Extending this further, though, and looking at those two items, net income then is also really a function of revenues and overhead, because revenues and how much you're bringing in at the top line and your overhead, that's what's getting you to where your net income or your earnings is at that point. So really focusing on these items ends up being your driver for value, because in a lot of cases, a lower overhead practice operates better, is also less risky, and one that is generating solid revenues and consistent revenues also is lowering risk, but is driving the net income between the both of them. So everything on this piece ties together and gets you back to where value is. So why is all this important? Because again, the reviewer, whether it be us as a valuation team, the purchasers and their advisors, and again, that's accountants, attorneys, it could be a spouse, it could be another family member, but also the lender, everyone is looking to understand the history of the practice and try to look at that and see how it's going to go forward. The consistency in your practice provides confidence and clarity and strength. And those are those pieces that drive value. If you're going to go buy something, if you're going to go pick and buy something from a certain brand, you're doing that because you have built trust with that brand for all of those pieces. You have confidence in what that brand is, and you know that the product is going to hold up. And that could be anything, from t-shirt to furniture to car. Just think about the things that you buy on a day-to-day basis. I mean, even the cereal that you buy, you like the taste, but you've built a loyalty with the brand as well, because there's a consistency in what you get out of it. So all of those pieces come together and provide the value that goes around really whatever the makeup of the rest of the practice is. So that comes back to, again, what would you prefer? Which one of these three? Again, I would hope that it would be number one. There are arguments I understand, again, for number three, but and especially if you're out in the market and looking for something of quote unquote value, or essentially a lesser price for the same amount of collections. That said, you as a owner, as a practice seller, that variability in number three is detrimental to you and your practice in the overall market. Number one is highly, highly more desirable than would be number three. I did mention a little bit about overhead, so I wanted to give you a flavor for overhead in the practice. This is a snapshot. It is not precise for your practice, but it'll give you kind of a ballpark. This is based on collections of about $1 million. And this is basically nationwide. In the more metro areas, in particular California and New York, potentially Chicago, some of these could be a little bit higher, especially in major metro areas where rent would be higher. But for sakes of like California and New York, wages are probably a little bit higher as well. I think I saw a case just yesterday in evaluation where we had hygienists get paid over $60 an hour. There are some of you, I'm sure, that would say, that's crazy. And there's some of you that are probably saying, well, that's a bargain. And that's just the reality of where we are, especially post-COVID. But this will give you a picture. This is from one of our lenders, but it's also what we use as a reference point. Again, it's not a be all end all. We do not normalize based on this. We do not normalize based on practice norms. We normalize based on your practice, because your practice is the entity that would be transitioned, not a normalized practice. The way that you operate it, again, and that transferability is important. So a general practice that's doing $1 million, but only has 25% overhead, we might have a question about the transferability of that and how the practice is made up and whether a purchaser can keep that going. And that's just part of the examination and part of the expertise that we bring in advising you in your ownership and the value overall of your practice. So this is a different picture. This is the picture of startup to maturity in a practice. I like this graph. We've used this graph for a while. It used to be my partner in a presentation would actually draw this out and put it up on a big whiteboard to walk through it. But this is really important. We have two lines here, obviously red and blue. The red is collections, the blue is expenses. So they're a little bit backwards as far as those colors may go. We've started in the bottom left at 0 and 0. Assuming a startup, that is actually not the case. We've been actually pretty generous to the practice, because in a practice startup, the expense line would start significantly higher on the y-axis than at 0, because there are expenses to starting a practice. Even on day one, just to open the doors, there's utilities, there's staff costs, there's technology costs. There are all kinds of other costs that go into it. So again, we're being pretty generous at 0 and 0, but for the sake of the model, it's worth conversing about. Expenses, though, as you see, do level off over time. Most of the expenses in your office are fixed expenses. So when you open the door, they already exist. Your staff would be considered in our MBA world as a step function, as in you don't add another staff member for every patient that walks in. But as you work through your process, you will add more staff members as your practice grows. The only two variable expenses that you have in your practice would be lab and supplies. And so in that case, again, those are affected by when a new patient walks in the door. This first part of your practice, of a startup practice, if you will, is negative. You're losing money. You have expenses, but you're not covering them. Finally, you reach this point, and that's when your profitability is at $1. Of course, I joke because in America, we take that dollar and we peg it on the wall. So you have to start over and get another dollar. But that's when you make that dollar. That's the inflection point. And then you continue to grow. You're going to finally get to a point where you're actually making a decent amount of money. For most practices, that's somewhere between, say, $600,000 and $800,000 in collections. And this could be a primary location. It could be multiple locations. It doesn't matter. You're going to have a set of expenses that go into that location. So in most cases, you're really starting to make money when the practice is doing somewhere in 600 to 800 range. From there, you grow a little bit larger, and that's where you're actually making much more money, because as you can see, your collections line is accelerating significantly faster than your expenses line. And that's when, again, you're taking home significantly more, and when we really start to see the profitability of a practice. We see the profitability of a practice max out somewhere between probably $1.2 million and $1.5 million for a solo practitioner. This is, again, when you've really maximized the overhead that you're operating with, and therefore you've maximized your earnings or your seller discretionary earnings, that difference between how much you're collecting and how much you're paying out in overhead and taking out the significant amount of money. Now, one of those things that can change is if, again, you're not collecting, you can have significant production with significant expenses, which then increase your overhead artificially without the collections following suit. So it can translate into you working through this graph significantly slower. This is why, again, collecting what you're working on is just so vitally important to your overall practice picture and where you are both in revenues and your overall net income. So as I mentioned before, we have that third methodology, which is the capitalization of earnings rate. It's probably the hardest to understand, but in looking at both overhead and kind of where you are in the practice process, We lead into this because, again, this is based on earnings and it's based on how much you're taking home. So when you've really maximized your return on your overhead and you're taking home significantly more money, this is when the capitalization rate really shows well. So what we look at in the capitalization rate is we're quantifying, again, risk. So how hard is it for a purchaser, for somebody, anybody, to take over your practice and maintain it? What's going on in the practice that would be risky for someone to take that over? There are several risk factors that we look at. The financial markets overall, because that's an alternative to investing in your practice. We could just go put it in the stock market and make money passively. We look at the national and local economies. We look at whether you have specialty in your practice, and that could be any specialty outside of your own. So it could be endo in a perio practice, but most often it would be specialty procedures in a general practice. Again, that goes to reproducibility and the transferability of your collections and your production overall. Reduced fees, big topic here, obviously, which we'll talk about a little bit more because you're producing, but you're taking home less. The size marketability would be how large you are. The closer you are within that solo practice or solo practitioner model, the easier it is to find somebody that's a buyer, and therefore it's easier to transition and less risky. Then we look at systems and how you operate. One of those would be how you're collecting funds. This again looks at non-owner third-party earnings after all operating expenses. We take that earnings number, divide it by your capitalization rate, and that's how we get to value. That's a very brief overview. This is part of my MBA for 2 years and a long time learning it. So I don't expect anyone to pick it up and actually learn this, but this is an actual methodology where we're doing analysis on your practice to understand what it is. Capitalization rate and EBITDA are very well tied together. It's kind of the inverse as far as EBITDA goes. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So we're looking at collections, again, minus practice overhead. You have to be collecting the money. Just because you're producing it doesn't matter. There's a cost of production. So we have to, in both models, employ associates because, again, it's a third-party owner. And then you're going to look at risk factors, but those risk factors are going to go into that multiple. So essentially, the lower risk, you're going to have a higher value. Again, higher risk, lower value. Solo practices generally are in the 3 to 4 times EBITDA range. We've seen them as high as 6, 7, 8, depending on how desirable they are. But this is often in line with gross revenue percentages, unless you're planning on staying around where we can get higher multiples out of your practice. Multiple practice roll-ups go higher, can go all the way up to 12 times EBITDA or even more, depending on the desirability. But again, that EBITDA multiple itself increases based on a couple of things. Oddly enough, one of those things is your profitability. So the higher the EBITDA, potentially the higher the value. So that's an exponential. It's a very fast increase in value. If you're more profitable, where your EBITDA multiple goes up. That actually goes in line though, because in a lot of those cases, your risk profile is much lower. So it's easier to attain that money. More locations and more revenues obviously would also then increase EBITDA. So as we said, net income or those earnings times EBITDA multiple gets you to what value is. Those are very well intertwined. Again, very dependent both on collections, not just on production, collections and your overhead and how much is left over at the end of the day. So this gets back to, which is something that I've been saying now several times, what is the cost of discounting or just not collecting dentistry? And it's pretty big. This is something I've been talking about for a very, very long time. And this could be across the board, anything. We're going to talk about a single crown, just a single crown on a single day. We're going to assume 100% UCR for that crown, and that's just over $1,500 nationally. That is a national average, and ideally, we'll get you close to somewhere around 1,500. We've got people that can help you to do that. It takes you about 1 hour and 3/4 to do that crown between prep and cementation. There's obviously a lab fee. You pay Henry Schein for your supplies. We have fixed expenses. So that would be rent. That would be overhead. Rent. It would be utilities. It would be your staff. All of those other overhead expenses. We multiply, say, $525 per hour times 1.75 hours for you to do that work. We have pre-tax earnings of that of $378. So your earnings per hour are $216. I'm now going to show you where it gets a little bit dicier, because what we're going to start doing is discounting that crown. And this could be any discount. It could just be you giving a friends and family discount. Essentially, though, it is uncollectible UCR. You're deciding not to collect it. But this could be from PPOs as well. 90%, it's a $1,300, just under $1,400 fee. It takes you the same amount of time to do that crown. You're using the same lab, the same supplies, and the same office space. So those don't cost you any less. So your pre-tax earnings on that crown is $223, and your earnings per hour is $127 per hour. Big difference. The next one is 80%. And most PPOs are already discounting you by 20%. We have the tools with United's PPO to help you negotiate these things. Obviously, eAssist is here to help you collect on these things, but you discounting 20% on your UCR, you don't do it any faster. You don't have a separate lab, supply, or office again. So now your $1,200 crown earns you $69 pre-tax, or $39 per hour to do that work. This is why collections is incredibly important in your practice, because this is where that breaks down. Just so you know, that $39 per hour for a hygienist, it gets paid $350 a day. They're making almost $44 an hour. And as I said just a few minutes ago, $350 a day or $44 might be a bargain for most of you for your hygienist. Discounting fees is significant to your practice. It means that you have to work harder to get to the same place. But again, your overhead doesn't change. You're not selecting different items to do that crown. It's going to cost you the same. So here's another example. Let's just say that you don't get paid on a pro fee. And this probably happens a lot. But if we consider one unpaid pro fee per day, and at UCR nationally, it's $170, just as a benchmark for you. $170 per day. Assume you have a 4-day work week, that's $680 per week of production. Ideally, that's also collections. But in this case, you're not collecting on that. You're not collecting on that one unpaid pro fee. Over 45 weeks, that's going to cost you almost $31,000. Over 50 weeks, that's going to cost you $34,000, and that's just from your pocket. We just talked about capitalization and how we get to earnings, though. So I want to bring that around. This money that you lost was already, you've already paid your overhead on it. This is extra. This is earnings to you. So in that case, if we take that and capitalize each one of those, you can see a $30,000 loss in collections can translate to a $150,000 loss in value. That is a significant loss. And that was just one pro fee per day. That's just one pro fee that you may not be getting paid on per day, for whatever reason it may be. We're using a 20% capitalization rate. That is very fair for the overall market. If that rate gets lower, the value goes higher, though. If the capital goes higher, your practice is again riskier. That number goes down. But even so, I mean, you're talking about 100,000 plus in value, and $30,000 a year just in your pocket in earnings, which could be your entire retirement fund. It could be a couple of vacations. It could pay for my kids to go to school. They go to public school, but they could pay for their dance or gymnastics. It's a lot of things, right? That's a lot of money. So making sure that you're getting paid for the production that you're doing, again, we cannot stress the importance enough. So benefits of outsourcing collections, we're going to minimize the possibility of those write-offs and those losses, so we can make sure we're collecting on all of that work. And look, it frees up the time. It frees up your team to do things that are better for your patients. It's better for your practice. You can be confirming appointments, providing a higher level of care, making sure the operatories and everything is clean and functional all the time, getting holes in your schedule filled. There's so many things that can be done by that team rather than following up that can enhance your practice and decrease the transferability risk just very easily. It reduces your personal stress, and we know any way we can do that is better. but it also ensures that you're getting paid for your education, your experience, and your time. That is mostly what you're providing by way of your fees, right? I mean, the crown itself costs $150, but it's your time, it's your understanding, it's your knowledge, it's your staff's time and experience. It's all of that that ensures when we get that money into your pocket that you're getting paid for it. And again, just by outsourcing, it's cost effective. The amount that it costs for you to outsource and work through this is highly cost effective based on the return. So this is a significant benefit to you overall in practice. Turning those billings into collections is super important. None of these expenses go down year over year. We've been talking now for probably over a year, actually a little bit longer with inflation last year, about how costs are increasing every day. I think every day I'm seeing on the news conversations about how grocery prices are going up, and there's no end in sight about where prices may be going at this point. The reality is that functionally happens in your practice as well. All of your operational costs are increasing every year. Lab costs are going up, your rent goes up, your employees are not getting less expensive, whether it be salaries alone, but there's insurance and training and the benefits, recruiting team members, whatever it may be, those costs go up. But let's not forget, it's not just in your practice. Everything at home goes up as well. Utility bills goes up. Again, your grocery bills go up. Car payments change. Kids get older. Maybe they need college expenses, whatever it may be. Again, we just added a dog. That was another expense that goes into our household, right? So all of those expenses go up every year. So it's vital that you are collecting and making sure that your earnings are solid, because that is what's providing for you at home. None of these prices go down year over year. They're always going up. Therefore, you need to be on top of both your production, but also your collections, and your overall revenues. As we've talked about a lot, practice valuations are vitally important. We ideally would like you starting 3 to 5 years out, but we do valuations 10, 15 years out to help you plan. We can do it. And a lot of our valuations right now are done just before you go to listing to help determine a price. But ideally, if we're talking to you early, we can bring in our partner, our partners, whether it be at eAssist or Unitas PPO, or we're talking about bringing in, an associate or bringing in new equipment. We have all of those things in all of those cards in our deck to be able to provide to you and help you with to enhance and grow and strengthen your practice. And that is not only helping your value at the end of the day, but it's helping you take home more in the interim. We need a lot of things. By no means, I mean, do I hide that our list is long, but as hopefully you understand, we actually look at a significant amount to help you not just evaluate the practice, but then give you guidance going forward on what your practice is not only worth, but how you potentially could take more out of it. This is something as we wind down, that's important to me, because I did talk about my father who practiced. He had to stop practicing because he became a disabled practitioner. He pinched a nerve in his back and it went down his right hand, and he was right-handed. So when he would sit in the stool, his right hand would go numb and he couldn't hold an instrument. So he had to stop practicing. I had another partner who had a skiing accident. We deal with every year too many practitioners that pass away or get disabled and are not able to continue practicing. So planning for that, although not a desirable topic, is vitally important. So these are our 3 points overall, and these percentages probably are a little bit on the high side, but why planning is so important. Only 30% of practices will sell within 90 days of you passing away. Only additional 10% would sell after 90 days. And the reality is 60% of practices just do not sell and they end up closing out. And there's just nothing left for your estate, your family, or overall. Majority of practice sales right now are selling between 60 and 90% of prior's gross revenue. Again, this is not a valuation. This is just what the numbers end up bearing out to be. But this gets into what is your exit strategy. And obviously there is a planned exit strategy, but there is the bigger overriding piece, like I talked about my father, and Paul and these other practitioners that we deal with far too regularly, about emergency exit strategy planning. This is my family, my kids. I got this short one. I got Colette in there on this picture. But in talking about protecting your family, there are a number of items that are very important. One, if you don't have a will, please go get one. please talk to a qualified estate attorney and get a will put into place. There's also something that would go with your will. It's called a codicil. The codicil is essentially an amendment to your will. This codicil could function as anything, but the one in particular that I'm talking about would give the ability for someone to operate your practice in the case that something happens to you where you cannot do that. That's important because, again, it keeps the practice open, it keeps staff employed, it keeps patients walking in the door, and it gives something to continue to transition. The moment you close the door, you stop seeing patients, and potentially the staff leaves, the value is gone. There's nothing left. So having a codicil with somebody named, ideally not a staff member, I think I'm named in a bunch, it's somebody that's not a family member who has something to do if something happens to you, to keep that practice operating is important. It's a very simple document, but it's very, very important. The last is a letter of instructions. This is a list of all kinds of things that go on and make up your practice. This is basically what the letter of instructions is. We will give this to you. I'm going to put a QR code and URL up in a second, but it's a collection of all the information for your practice. And this is not to be hidden. This is like, in the case of emergency, break the glass. This is what that's for. So it's really everything that you have by way of contacts, passwords, how you get into things, and people should know where this is. It's not a fun document to complete, but it's a vitally important one in the case that something does happen to you. We'll give this to you complimentary. We think it's that important for you to do. You can go to henryscheindpt.com/what-if. If you're watching at your computer and you have your phone and you can use that QR code, you can do that as well. But again, this is a free resource we give to you because we think it's that important. We deal with this far too often. And it's so hard to deal with spouse and family as we do. And we do, don't get me wrong, but it's not a fun process. So the more you can plan just for the what if, it probably not going to happen, but just for the what if is important. So we talked about the will, codicil, letter of instructions. The last thing, as we talked about, is a practice valuation. That's something that we'd like for you to have. Even if you're 15 years from transition, do it. Again, we can give you advice on what you can do to help increase the value of your practice. You keep that up to date, you keep it on file. It helps you transact your practice faster in the case that something happens to you. And as we discussed, speed makes the difference. The faster we can transact your practice after something happens, if something happens, the more value your estate, your family, your friends, whoever it is, it's going to, will be left with. So these are the next steps as far as emergency exit strategy. Again, draft that letter of instructions and gather your important life information. As soon as possible, have a valuation on every practice that you have. If you have co-owners or partners, look at your review your buy and sell agreements, the agreements that are between you guys overall, to make sure that you're covered. You'd want to do this by a transition consultant. We don't do that for legal, obviously, but we'll look for the transition issues, but then also possibly by legal counsel, because they can get into the legal ramifications and potential fixes if that needs to happen. If you have leases, have those reviewed. And again, that's just good practice anyway. There are far too many cases, as I told you, just this week, we have one going on right now where we cannot transact a practice, therefore is no value because the landlord holds the cards in that lease. You may not have read your lease that in depth when you signed it, but now is the time. Go spend a few minutes, review that lease, and make sure that you're covered. Again, potentially doing that with legal counsel. Talk to your CPA, have an attorney around, talk these things through. And again, we're always happy to help talk those through. We do a lot of future planning for transition because, again, we think that it not only helps your value at the end of the day, but we can identify these places where we can help your practice in the meantime. And again, in a lot of cases, that's just top line collections getting you to revenues, whether it be squishing your overhead and making you more efficient or helping your collections overall. The more you're taking home day to day is to your benefit. But then again, it also helps value at the end. As I talked about value, we do have a guide to practice valuations. You can use this QR code again if you're sitting at your computer, or you can go to bit.ly/pval ebook. That's free. We're going to give that to you. So please feel free to go download that. You can learn more about practice valuations overall. We also have an update. We do this throughout the year, just of transactions throughout the country and just kind of a profile of what they are. We do have an update to that. So again, if you're at your computer, you can use this QR code or bit.ly/dental market watch 2025. These are our own transactions. They're updated. We've now done a second update for the year. These are current transactions and current information for you. This is our practice valuation, just so you have an idea. We revamped this at the beginning of the year. It's very in-depth, exhaustive as far as information goes. We go through fees, we go through collections, we go through demographics, we go through overhead, procedure mix, just a lot of different factors. Again, it was entirely rewritten. We've worked with our partners at Henry Schein One and Jarvis to make this even more in-depth. Again, you do not just get us as a dental practice transitions team. It is our family of Henry Schein services that we're trying to leverage to make your practices better, which is again why I assume that you're here. If you're interested in a practice valuation, QR code or bit.ly/pval inquiry, and our local transitions consultant will get in touch with you and help you to evaluate your practice. This is what I do on a day-to-day basis. I look at practice valuations. I live in Excel and look at numbers and work with our analysts to pull those levers. It's a very complicated business overall, but it's truly valuable to you. And we're proud that we're doing this in-house and we're able to provide this level of service to you. This is my contact information. You're certainly welcome to reach out. Email is usually best, but there's my phone number as well. Our website is henryscheindpt.com. Those 3 URLs that I talked about are here between the ebook, Market Watch, and the inquiry. I think I only left about 4 minutes for questions. I don't know if there are any out there, but I'm happy to go through them quickly. Or again, I'm always happy to go through questions that you have. Thank you. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate you so much for sharing your insights today. I actually don't see any questions. If anyone has questions, we'd love to, I know Greg would love to answer them. I feel like he has given us a clear picture of how practice performance, particularly in collections, plays a critical role in long-term value and successful transitions. I know it's a big piece of the puzzle that he has talked about today. One of the biggest takeaways, I think, is if you want to build a practice that's not only profitable now, but sellable later, it starts with clean financials and all those percentages he was talking about today. And I still don't see any questions, but I just want to thank you. This webinar is sponsored by eAssist Dental Billing Solutions. That's where kind of dental billing comes into, is to try to help just build those financials. eAssist is the nation's leading dental billing company. eAssist helps practices collect 100% of what's rightfully owed. We can help reduce your aging, help clean up the back office efficiencies, just whatever is going on in your practice. We'd love to help. You can go to dentalbilling.com. And one last thing before you go, please watch for a quick post-webinar survey. There's just 2 questions. This will just help us. Your feedback is important. It helps every session be better and more relevant to your needs. And thank you again for joining us. And a big thank you to Greg Auerbach and the team at Henry Schein Dental Practice Transitions. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Have a good day.